this has been sort of a hobby with me, and I'm doing this first because maybe it goes long, maybe it goes short, but I think it's might be worthwhile. He was born in a place that was so small that it was just a post office stop on the railroad. His ancestors were from Ireland. Strange enough, they were Protestants from Ireland. There's the house he was born in, and it is still occupied today. He went to University of Pennsylvania, which was 2 6-month terms. Then he went into practice in Towanda, Pennsylvania, which is near Happy Valley. Oh, that's a football thing, so you folks can't remember much about football, so I needn't say that. Now, for those of you who are curious, Doc Holliday, you've heard of Doc Holliday. Well, he graduated from Pennsylvania, but he graduated in 1872. So they were not colleagues. But the interesting thing is, Doc Holliday went west to die of tuberculosis and, in fact, managed it. It's an interesting parallel we'll see in a little while. Because Angle got what they call acute pleural pneumonia, and he also went west. Supposedly, and back in those days, west was anything west of the Adirondacks, really. And so he went to Minneapolis. Interesting enough, I used to teach at Western Reserve University in Cleveland, and the reason it was called Western Reserve was because when the 13 original states were platted, they didn't know how far west everything went. So I think it was Connecticut claimed everything from there as far as it went. And so that's why, so Cleveland was the Western Reserve of, I think it was Connecticut, something like that. But anyway, he went off to Minneapolis, and he was always big into money. I mean, he was a very wealthy man. And the Bally Bay, they were his Irish friends that he knew in Minneapolis. And they tried to corner the sheep market. And something we still, every once in a while, you still hear about every now and then is the freeze of '82. Well, it killed every one of his sheep. And he was bankrupt. He never spoke to his brother again. For some reason, he thought it was his brother's fault. But there he is, looking like he wanted to look like. He went back to Nicollet Avenue, and he got himself maxillofacial surgeon for the Great Northern Railroad, and he began teaching, and he started teaching in 1884, and he became professor in 1885, which is pretty good speed. He became he started to become known from a presentation at the 9th International Medical Congress. A number of people, a few people said, well, that's not new stuff, those aren't new appliances. And so he was always kind of nasty, and he never really forgave them for it. He became professor at Northwestern. And there's our man, looking cool. In the 50th anniversary of the Cleveland Society of Orthodontists, I attended only so that I could wear a dinner jacket with a wing collar, like Edward Hartley Angle. So he went from Pennsylvania to Minnesota to Montana, back to Minnesota. He's the first person to limit his practice to orthodontia. He said he wasn't going to do it. It wasn't a case of there were orthodontists and there were boards and everything like that. He just in 1892 decided that he was only going to do orthodontics. Now, he hired a woman by the name of Anna Hopkins, age 21, and he said she was his amanuensis, and there will be a tiny prize for anybody who knows what amanuensis means. I was doing this in a foreign country one time, and by God, the translator knew what it meant. About this time, the Marion Sims School of Medicine, which is now St. Louis University, and by the way, this shows you how things change. James Marion Sims, they named the school after him, was supposedly the father of modern gynecology, especially for his work on rectovaginal fistulas. But it turns out he was in the South, and there were a number of people in the South who were only 3/5 of a person, and he did all of his experiments on them. So he's no longer considered the father of anything. But the deal with the Marion Sims, you remember University of Pennsylvania was 2 6-month stints. Marion Sims started a 4-year curriculum, and he thought a 4-year curriculum would definitely be enough to teach orthodontics. It wasn't like he was trying to, it wasn't like some places today where you're trying to hide the secrets from the unwashed. He wanted the time. He wanted people to buy his book. He wanted people to buy his appliances and everything like that. And so, off to Missouri. Interesting thing about this state, if you're on the east half of the state, it's Missouri. If you're on the west half of the state, it's Missouri. So politicians campaigning in the middle of the country have to have 2 sets of campaigns in which it's pronounced either way. And so this is where he moved to in St. Louis. And at this board, there was a duplex. And Dr. and Mrs. Richard Summa were there, and they're the ones who found, supposedly Angle thought that this was the key. It was the skull of a mound-dwelling Native American from Illinois. And Angle thought it was so important, secretum apertum, the secret revealed. So Richard Summa, who found it, lived next door, and oh yes, Anna Hopkins was there too. And there's the place. This was the Summas, and this was Edward Hartley Angle and Anna Hopkins. This is where his school was. I kept this. Strange enough, it's been all remodeled now, and it looks fantastic, but I kept this old thing because to me it seems to be sort of a statement about the state of orthodontics. But there it is, 1023 North Grand. That was, he had the second floor, 4 second-floor buildings, second-floor rooms, I should say. And this was his teaching routine. He gave evening lectures, and in 1900, he started the Angle School, the first school of orthodontia. From Missouri, he moved to New York, and from New York to Connecticut. So in 1908, his courses were in New York, and then he went off to New London, Connecticut, etc. 1916, he went to Pasadena, California. He always wanted to go to California. He had some of the most famous architects in the United States design him a house, a sort of a craftsman-style house in California. He didn't have it built, but he bought one that was similar. There's your humble servant, 1025. I was standing there, and a person came out, and I said, "Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean." But in my calling, somebody who's famous used to live here, and he said, you need to talk to Nana. And Nana came out, and Nana could remember Anna Hopkins. Great, great place. In fact, he had a brass plaque, an Art Deco brass plaque in his in the surround of his fireplace. And I found one on the internet. And so I got myself a brass plaque, just like Edward Hartley Angle. He died August 11th, 1930. That's a dramatic fade. But these are really just the bare bones. They don't really tell you what kind of a person caused us to be here. Look at this philosophy. I always put philosophy in quotes because philosophy is something that great scientists had. We don't have philosophy. We just have guesses and stuff like that. But here was Angle's idea of how things worked, how you corrected a class 2. Remember, Angle thought that the upper first molar was the key to occlusion. So what he would do is he would distalize the first molar, and he would do it anyway, class 2 elastics, headgear, whatever, distalize the first molar to get a normal occlusion. And his idea was that a normal occlusion was so good that it would suddenly, and you can't, the way things are in 2019, you can't laugh at this. You just can't laugh at this because he thought once he had a good occlusion, the mandible would grow and bring everything forward, and the class 2 would be corrected, the upper molar would be in its original position. Voila. I wonder if this works. No, it doesn't. Well, there was a tiny problem. As I'll tell you, he had always was fighting with Calvin Souverill Case, who was from Michigan, by the way. And Case invented class 2 elastics. And Angle would not use anything that was invented by Calvin Case, except somebody said that there's an obscure dentist in Boston by the name of Baker who supposedly had invented class 2 elastics. Actually, they were just up and down elastics to get a canine down in his son. But once they called them Baker Anchorage rather than class 2 elastics, once it was something by Baker rather than Calvin Souverill Case, then he used them. Perfectly fine. And there are the references for this little thing. Now, bone growing, which we've been fighting with for about 150 years, at that time was really consistent with European orthopedic thought. You had Wolff's law, and presumably you had some of that in facial growth. Okay, you had Wolff's law, and you also had Wilhelm Roux, the morphological law of functional adaptation. He had the idea that you had to have, what would we call it now, where you press on the bone enough that there's a strain, there's a bending of it. He called that shaking the bone. So as a result, if you look in Angle's case, he had a called the Huning case. It was a case where he just blew everything out, and even he thought it didn't look good. But he called the case back, and a year or so later, it looked good. And so he thought he'd found the secret, that blowing the teeth out like that it would cause alveolar bone to be developed, and everything would be fine. So that was the Huning case was the basis of Angle's idea that if you get the proper occlusion, you'll get the proper bone. His ideas were ruled the day, except after the Second World War, people started to wonder, whether or not, making a class 1 occlusion would make the face grow well. Here's his philosophy of regulation. And by the way, they didn't say straightening the teeth. They didn't say we're going to put braces, appliances to regulate the malocclusion. A malocclusion was an irregularity which needed to be regulated. So his first appliance was the E-arch, and I'll show you these later. It was a heavy gold wire, 035, 038, 040, 044, with threaded end sections. And so the deal was you'd ligate, well, maybe I can find that, just a second here. Okay, pass this around. This is an E-arch with the teeth tied to the E-arch with grass line. Grass line was linen ligature, which, when it got wet, would shrink. And so the idea was you had threaded end sections, you'd turn them against a buccal tube, that would advance the arch wire, like so, and the teeth that were tied to it would expand along with it. Oh, that's a slide so good, I had to show it twice. Then came the pin and tube appliance. The pin and tube appliance, here we go. One for here, and one for you, so that you can control your enthusiasm for this. Pin and tube appliance was a 2x4. The brackets were vertical tubes into which 4 pins on the arch wire fit, like so. It was very, very difficult. To show you how difficult this appliance was, here is some of Engel's cases, one of his cases from 1914. And the deal was they had very heavy gold arch wires, which had to be, I think he would see the patient every week and had to be slowly unbent, but it had to be unbent in such a way that he could still get the pins into the tube, which was just a killer, an absolute killer. The pin and tube appliance became popular because, again, they thought that it was a bone grower. It was his so-called working retainer, his bone growing device. Because the deal was, first with the E-arch, you expanded as much as you needed, you blew the incisors out, and then with the pin and tube, you'd have facial root torque, and the idea that that would grow bone. There was a time when people would laugh at this, but not now. Hey, that sounds like a pretty good idea. Yeah, okay. He also used bite jumping to increase the length of the mandible. There's almost nothing we pretend to believe in today that Engel didn't believe in. This is a note to Wilhelm Herbst. He thought it was Emil Herbst. He thought he was writing this letter to the inventor of the Herbst appliance. Instead, it was Wilhelm Herbst was a big dental entrepreneur. And so this is the letter he wrote to him. And unfortunately, I can't get the thing to show so I can read more of it. But let me see if I can briefly do it.
Just right click.
What?
Right click and then say presenter mode.
Right click. Oh, it doesn't work because I have this thing. Never mind. I've used up all my spaces.
That's okay.
we go. I have just received a circular advertising your appliances. Why are you just a copyist of my appliances? And a bad one, a very bad one at that. Why can't you add something of real merit to the science of orthodontia? It's a sad comment on your country, the work you and Alfred Corbetts are doing. You could at least, if you were honorable men, give credit where credit is due, even though you are violators of the law. And then he ended up saying, I would be pleased to have your opinion on this subject. Let me see if I can go down. Oh yeah, okay. I would be pleased to have your views on this point. Turns out Emil Herbst, Heidenhaus, and Corbetts are the ones who started Deutsche Gesellschaft für Orthopädie, the German Orthodontic Society. Oh, that's going to be the next one. See, if you're excited to see the next one. And I thought he was crazy. But the deal is, he did have essentially a Herbst appliance. He had interlocking rings that held the mandible forward and allowed it to move from side to side. His next appliance was the ribbon arch. And the ribbon arch had a bracket that looked like that. In fact, it turned upside down. That's the original beg bracket, because in Australia, it was too hard. His original, all his brackets were made of gold, were machined out of gold. But in Australia, that was too hard, too difficult. But this bracket, they could stamp it out of heavy band material. There'd be flanges here and there. They could stamp it out of heavy band material. So the ribbon arch bracket, turned upside down, was the beg bracket. And into it went an 022 by 036 gold arch wire. Now, the reason I show you that is, for those of you who are arguing, I use 22 slots, 18 slots, whatever, 022 is a remnant of history 100 years ago. 022 stayed on, was in this, it was in edgewise, completely different times, completely different appliances, etc. So the deal is, you're going to have to decide between 022 and 018 in 2019 based on the materials of 2019. So that's the way it went in. There was a pin, a brass pin, like so. That's what held it in. And then now you know, now I'll show you why they call it edgewise. This arch wire went in a way they called it ribbon-wise. That's why we call it edgewise. And let me see when I'm doing this. Here is a wonderful example of that. Let me see if I have some more here. No. This is, I'll pass this around. This is a wonderful appliance. First of all, it's ribbon arch. It's also got a little ball on the front here, and that's Angle's headgear. Had a little cup, like a trailer hitch. And just the cup would go over that ball, and the arms would go back like a person walking a tight wire. The arms would go back, and this was essentially a safety headgear long before its time. And you'll notice there is a second arch wire up roughly at the level of as close as they get to the center of rotation. And for a long time, people were thinking that that's where the arch wires were going. Ricketts originally was going to have a second arch wire like that. Check the brackets, check that, and just check the general technical excellence of that appliance. And essentially turned it like that and then just made it smaller. And so here is some of his drawings for his edgewise appliance, and you'll notice he was very concerned about whether or not the wings, whether patients would tolerate the wings. And so you see he had all sorts of things where he had holes where you'd thread the ties through, everything like that. Yeah.
All of these ideas and stuff like that, he was able to just find manufacturers that would do that for him?
The S.S. White Dental Manufacturing Company. And it was all over the world. So here's S.S. White Dental Manufacturing Companies. That was from Germany.
So he'd send him the prototype, or he'd send him the design?
I don't know. Nothing there. And for example, E.H. Angle, headgear, S.S. White Dental Manufacturing Company. Here it is. It was bought in 1943 for $7.50. And that was his head cap that was attached to his headgear. So here were his appliances. And you'll notice I've done these wiggly because these appliances also required that you unbent them because they had brackets, and so you had to slowly unbend it. And the edgewise came along. It was patented in 1925, and a friend, one of his colleagues, Charles Hawley, developed the ideal arch, and he was supposed to go out. Angle's favorite teacher at Pennsylvania was William Gibson Arlington Bonwell, the Bonwell-Hawley diagram. And it was, he's the one, see if I could do this. He's the one who had this is lower incisors. He's the one who had the idea that, now that's not red, this is red. That was a perfect equilateral triangle. And of course, equilateral triangles are better than just ordinary triangles, and circles are better than this. But Bonwell said, "Now, O God, I think thy thoughts as thou didst before me." He literally thought that this was the secret to the way the body was put together. And Angle was impressed, so he had Charles Hawley use the ideas of William Gibson Arlington Bonwell to get the arch form we like today. Well, he had a number of books, and there's sort of arguments about, supposedly his last was the 7th edition, and here are what his various editions were. Now this is strange here. He had a 5th edition and a 6th edition 1 year apart. This is from the 5th edition in 1899, and it lists, in those days they listed all the things that the author had done. And you'll note between 1899 and 1900 he picked up an MD degree. Also, here he was professor of orthodontics, dental department of Marion Sims College of Medicine. The next year, that wasn't mentioned at all. Now it was Missouri Dental College, Washington University. In other words, something happened between, I can tell you, in the 70s, we just hated Washington University, just hated them. I remember one time, when Washington University was going to close, there was a rumor it was going to close. And I happened to pass the chairman of the department on the street. How's it going? Everything's fine. He said, you know, Lyle, you could do me a favor. And I said, what's that? He said, well, you could tell your residents to stop spreading the story that we're going to close. I said, oh, geez, I'm sorry. Yeah. Well, about a month later, they closed. And 2 months later, I saw him on the street. And I said, Rich, I just want you to know I've really taken to heart what you've said. My residents have stopped spreading the story that you're going to close. It was really bad feelings. So something happened in 1900. The 7th edition was in 1907. This is something that you ought to take a peek at, because it really was a masterful book. I had 5, 6, and 7, and I gave them away because I didn't want my kids to say, what's this crappy old book? We just throw that away. But if on the internet, if you get a chance to get Angle's 7th, that would be a good deal. Here's his universities. He taught at Minnesota. He taught at Northwestern. He taught at Marion Sims. And here's where he said, I've taught in 3 colleges the past year, had a big row in 1, have resigned from 2, and think I shall quit the 3rd one, as the nerve strain of teaching seems to wear on me more each year. And then it's a thankless task. The more thoroughly you try to teach, the less it is appreciated by the school. The old principle is still uppermost in students' mind. The diploma is the one thing needful. The desire for real thorough oh, blast hell. Okay. The desire for real thorough education is the last thing they think of. So attitudes really haven't changed all that much in 100 years. This was November 7th, 1899, to Y.H. Bond, who was the dean. And you can see it there. I love this. I've never shown it this way before. Late last season, you were desirous of economizing the college's expenses to the extent of my salary. And he goes on, if however you wish me to continue, I will blah, blah, blah. Remember, this last was November. He wrote a lot of letters, And this is to November 7th. He says he's going to start a series of courses, a series of lectures. And you can see there, a short course of lectures on orthodontia, which will last 10 or 12 evenings, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It is without money and without price, but for the good of the cause. This was going back November 7th. 1 month later, after he started his lectures, he quit. Took him 1 month. And I think the problem was he wanted the students to have to buy his book every year. There was probably some kind of tear-out page or something like that. So he tendered his resignation, and after the success of his evening lectures, he decided to start a school. And we've got, and it would be really nice if this bloody, no, oh well, I'll go ahead. You got Angle, you've got Whirple, who was a professor of art at WashU. You had Martin Dewey, who was the first editor of the AJO. You had Frederick Sumner McKay, and I don't know what I've taught so many places. I had Frederick Sumner McKay's band driver, and I gave it to somebody a couple weeks ago. I can't remember who. Oh yeah, it's here. I gave it to, yeah, it's here. Frederick Bogue-Noyes. These were all heavy-duty people. You read there. Now, actually, it's probably pretty good here because it's good to hear Angle's actual words. You know, he's just a sweet old guy. It's small, thank God. It could have been much larger, but I've been pestered long enough. Oh, what a comfort it is to tell them the class is full, doctor. But then he says, I must close for there's 40 letters yet to write. And the reason I have this is because his eventual wife typed everything out on India paper, very, very thin paper that she made a carbon copy of. So the carbon copies of all of his letters existed when he died, and his acolytes went through and destroyed most of them because, well, they didn't pass muster then, so a lot of them wouldn't pass muster today. Listen, I think we could hold the session in a fine, big new tent and all be happy and study hard and learn much. I am thinking of it hard. Sweet old guy. Sweet old guy. Well, James Angle. The interesting thing of teaching at Case Western Reserve, I have I saw the copy of the telegram that Anna Hopkins sent to Birdsall Holly Broadbent telling him that James Angle had been killed in an earthquake. Angle wasn't a relationship. He was from the Dewey School, but he talked Angle into starting his school all over again in California. Students built this in 1923. Students built a school for him with the money from their 23rd patient. Now, the interesting thing is, and I can say this because I am considered to be insensitive, but essentially this school was your fairy godmother. This school tapped you on both shoulders and said, be rich, be happy. And the idea you all will be rich. We're all millionaires. We're all millionaires. And I cannot see how you cannot share that with your school. Yeah, I know the tuition is heavy duty. Heavy duty. But in a few years, it's going to be all paid off. And you're going to be a millionaire, all of you. You got to share some of it with your school. He was very crafty. He had 2 classes per year. One started in January and one started in June, and they would last a year, and then the troops would spend a second year bringing back their cases and showing their cases to the students. There's our man, and Anna Hopkins, soon to be Angle. This is still there. This southern exposure, this was his clinic, and they've changed it into a house now. Well, here's what he said. Now we're starting to get a feel for Angle. And he's trying to think of who's going to take his place, because he did in fact have tuberculosis, and he did die relatively young. And he finally decided that the person who was going to take over for him was Spencer Atkinson, because Spencer Atkinson had worked on the ribbon arch with him. They called the ribbon arch the tiny arch, because it was only 022 by 036. You see annealing and bending the ribbon arch, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But Spencer Atkinson was going to be the man. Well, here's the deal. There's the ribbon bracket and arch wire. Spencer Atkinson cut a slot in it. He cut a slot in it, so you had 014 stainless steel, you had the ribbon wire, and you had a lingual arch wire. And the deal was that once you went to 014 stainless steel, you could no longer use gold. So the folks out in the West got together, put up a few $1,000s to pay for a company to essentially make the stainless steel brackets and everything like that. And I always ask people if they can guess what that company is, but the way I'm showing it here, that's where Unitech came from, the universal technique. Now, the question is, what do you think Engel thought of this? When Engel heard that, he closed the school immediately. Immediately. One of his colleagues, George Hahn, rented a building, gave the last class. Tweed was a student, and in fact, I think I've heard that Tweed was on a train heading to Pasadena and got there and found that the course had been closed. That's dramatic there. But the deal is, Tweed was helpful to Engel in getting dental law through Arizona. The idea was, our profession is dentistry. Our specialty is orthodontics. Engel wanted orthodontics to be a profession, open to MDs, DDSs, everything like that. And Tweed helped get a law passed in Arizona that was possible. Nothing happened. Did any of you take the Tweed course? No, are you going to? Okay, you'll see on one of the posts, you'll see Arizona Dental Orthodontic Examiner's License number 1. So he closed the school in 26, but because Tweed was such a good guy, he gave him a diploma, 1927 and 28. Oh my God, look at here. He's now got a Doctor of Science degree. Stuck to it. So MD, DDS, SCD. Things were a little looser back then. Okay, the society. That's in italics. The society, not just any old Engel society. On June 1st, he started the Society of Orthodontists. It was started by Engel and 10 of his students. Engel was the first president. In 1902, they changed the name, which was a terrible mistake. It used to be the British Journal of Orthodontics, and now it's the Journal of Orthodontics. In England, it's the Journal of Anatomy, and also in France. So he should have said it's just the Society of Orthodontics. But anyway, it became the American Society in 1902, and in we'll get back to Anna eventually here. Well, first I must tell you about the meeting. Now listen to the words. For on this point my heart is full. And you notice said, from the fullness of the heart, the mouth speaketh. Well, in many respects it was, I think, the greatest meeting ever held in dentistry. And is thoroughly demonstrated, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Just, oh, it's so wonderful. Now, in 1949, Hubert Weissach, who became a famous British orthodontist and was very much into the environmental. And he was talking about, he was in Engel School, and he wrote in the British Dental Journal what it was like, what a day in Engel School was like. Well, yeah, that's good to have it in black. One day, Weissach wanted to talk to Engel. Didn't quite understand some of his ideas. Just Engel wouldn't see him. Weissach persisted, and so Engel saw him only long enough to throw him out of the school. I used to say, isn't that awful? But thinking about it now, I'll get back to you on that one, whether it's good or bad. Now, when Weissach was expelled, Weissach was one of the ones who started the society with him. And Rodriguez Ottolenghi, who, by the way, was considered one of America's great short story writers, and the 100th anniversary of the short story, you know, The Ransom of Red Chief 100 years later, one of his short stories was considered one of America's best short stories. He was the censor of the American Society, and when Engel told him that he had thrown Weissach out of his class, he said, you of course want to throw him out of the society. And Ottolenghi wouldn't do it. And so guess what happened? So Engel resigned. He started the thing. He resigned. They didn't accept his resignation. In 1907, he resigned and it was accepted. So his school, the greatest little school in all the world, somebody crossed him and he closed it. Probably one of the things that came out of this series of lectures was that's why you go to the AAO meeting, there's a Hellman lecture, there's all sorts of, the Salzman lecture, everything like that, but there was never any Angle lecture. And the reason there was never any Angle lecture, because he wasn't a member. But there was one lecture that didn't have a name. And so the Heritage lecture was changed to Edward H. Angle lecture. They've added a prophet lecture, which I think is a terrible mistake. Because, for example, when I die, I got more students than prophet. They'll say, well, where's the Johnston lecture? And then when Buzz Barents dies, where's the Barents lecture? They should have a lecture that, because there's going to come a time when people will not have heard of me or Barents or prophet. So, but anyway, this Angle Heritage lecture. And so now, let's take a look at the Angle societies. Mother Angle. Now this is how rapidly he moved. He resigned in 1906, and he decided that the only society that could exist, the only orthodontic society that could exist, was one of just his students. So you had the Angle School of Orthodontics, the Alumni Society, 1906. He started it instantaneously after he quit. And I showed this to show you Angle truly thought that orthodontics was a learned medical specialty. And so if you look at the topics in the first meeting, developing the jaws and face, quantitative methods in biology, the role of teeth in human development, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, he was serious. This wasn't how to solder things better. Maybe he could have, well, I guess that's correct. But you see, he was dead serious about orthodontics being a learned calling. Now, about this, well, it passed from beginning to end in a most enjoyable and satisfactory manner and closed with a 3-day session of the Alumni Society meeting, which he called the grandest, most high-class, and most scientific meeting ever held. Actually, at the banquet, he said, all you can do is push, pull, or twist a tooth. I have given you an appliance that will do that. For God's sakes, use it. He wrote this just before he died. Yesterday, I practically resigned from the society. I'm truly glad to be done with it. They will not study, and there's been no progress. So everything he ever started, he quit. Everything he started, he quit. So in 1930, when he died, the Angle Society, or the Alumni Association of the Angle School of Orthodontia, became the Angle Society, and in 1930 they started the Angle Orthodontist, in which Anna Hopkins was the first editor. This he's sending to, this Christmas card he's sending to somebody in Germany, and you'll see he signs it, the Großeltern, the old folks. I think it was to, I forget who it was in Germany, Großeltern. This is worthwhile. This he sent to W.J. Brady, who was the head of the orthodontic program at Iowa. And this, your mighty, welcome, unctuous, juicy, and enjoyable letter received, and I only write to acknowledge it. and say that I think Anna will be on hand, and thank you also for your extreme kindness in offering to make it pleasant for her. I wish you could manipulate the pull strings and get her exempt from dissecting, then that's the way he spelled it, dissecting, plate work, etc. He ends up with, these are just quiet little tips between ourselves. Well, she did in fact graduate. She didn't practice, but she graduated from Iowa. And here he is, L to P. There's lots of his letters to L to P. I love it. I'm sorry to hear of your illness and domestic hell. He couldn't force himself to write out hell. The latter is one of my chief structural ailments. And he says, we must shake off this curse, my boy. We are foolish to continue it. I truly hope you will be better in a physical way soon. Well, here's his history. He married the sister of his machinist, the person who machined his brackets, Florence A. Canning, March 1887. He had a daughter, Florence Isabel, born in November of 1887. Don't bother to count. And the funny thing, he called his wife Florence Sr., and he called his daughter Florence Jr. He hired Anna Hopkins, I told you, in 1893. He left Florence Sr. in 1900 and moved into 3739 Windsor Place with Anna. Now, the deal was, supposedly he waited until I think it was 1908 to marry Anna Hopkins, because the way he was brought up, a divorce was a sin. And he waited until his mother died to get a divorce from Florence Sr. so he could marry Anna Hopkins. Supposedly also, they couldn't find any marriage records in St. Louis. They think maybe he got the divorce maybe in Washington, someplace where the terms were better for him. Sort of like Jeff Bezos, you know. His wife was only going to have $65 billion. Anyway, so there she is, a mother angle. In fact, she was still alive when I started. Now here is his practice in St. Louis, and you'll note that he had everything a person needs, including a copy of the Belvedere Apollo, which he considered to be the perfect profile. It sort of looks like Elvis Presley, but the interesting thing is, secretum apertum, the skull of the mound dweller, could not have produced this profile. So he's a little inconsistent there, but that's what he thought was, well, obviously because he had it overlooking his chair. So let's take a look at his practice. Well, I started on one of Adolphus Bush's children the past weekend and cannot figure out how it could possibly be less than 1,500 or 2,000. Also one of the Lambert Listerine people, and one or two other very good cases. So the Lord is good to us, and I should be, I suppose, more thankful than I am. And this is actually the way he typed it. But I shall try to make my thankfulness manifest in the most honest and conscientious work that I can do. This is where after he got one of Adolphus Bush's kids, he said, I want you to listen. You will hear the price of beer. No, you will hear the price of beer go up one of these days, because he was charging Adolphus Bush so much. Do you know what 2,000 bucks would be in 1900, 1899? Multiply that by 20 or 30. And there's the beer that the price was going to go up. Breckenridge Jones. Breckenridge Jones was a bank and railroad president, and I love this one. Your favor of May 23 received. I'm delighted at your decision for the boys have been so delinquent and so filled with flimsy excuses and evasive arguments that they have become a thorough nuisance, and I am glad to be through with them. And yet, as I come to know you better, I am inclined to believe that the boys are not so much to blame. They come honestly by it. While it is most unpleasant to be compelled to discontinue treatment, blah, 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 blah. Wouldn't you like to write a letter like that? Now, Breckenridge Jones, this is one of the things that happened to him. He was arrested, but he was, in fact, one of the wealthiest men in St. Louis, and there was his bank building. I forget what it is now, but that was the Missouri Bank building, and that was Breckenridge Jones's building, and Angle told the richest guy in St. Louis what he could do with his kids. Well, maybe not what he could do with his kids, but how about his colleagues? Do you think Angle was collegial with his colleagues? Jason McDowell, who was the first professor at Illinois, and he was one of Angle's students. I've read your book, and I am more and more convinced that you are a fool. I know you're not supposed to read PowerPoint, but I just like to read it. I tried years ago to get you to take the hint, but unfortunately you could not. Now it is too late, and everybody is onto it. Blah, blah, blah. And I need to get to the bottom here. Ah, you bloody hell. There's got to be a way of doing this. Oh, I know. There. You can't realize that sawdust can't be substituted for brains in orthodontia. Yours truly, your old teacher and benefactor. P.S. Only monkeys, not men, imitate. P.S. number 2, ostriches put their head under the sand and think they are not seen, but they are. Haw, he, haw. Look in the glass. What do you see? Nothing. Just nothing but ingratitude. Supposedly, he sent Jason McDowell a penny postcard of a jackass every day for the rest of his life. I think. Some of this stuff maybe just giving you the rumors and everything that I have heard. Now, to show you that he really was the start of orthodontics, he got into golf. And Otto and Bob, they were friends of his from Minneapolis. Now a word to the dude stick question. He called golf clubs dude sticks. I suppose the clubs did surprise you, for you both recall how I associated them with low, ornery cusses, weak-eyed, flabby-muscled, receding-chinned, wake with a start, mouth-breathing degenerates. And something to be smiled at in derision by stalwart, manly, blah, blah, blah. Let's see if I can get down to the end of it here. He says, if you are successful and can take a reasonable amount of leisure, you should take it. It's one of the most sane, healthful, enjoyable games ever. And he says, of course, I play with the Gould, Vanderbilt, and Astor children, and now and then take a turn with Uncle John and Andy. Do you know who Uncle John was? John D. Rockefeller, who was a billionaire at the turn of the century. In 1900, he was a billionaire. Supposedly, that made him the richest person who ever lived. When I was a kid, he lived quite a long time. During the Depression, he would have a pocket full of dimes, and then their little starving beggar children along the street, he would give them a dime. John and I have become, we play about the same kind of game. I have studied it, got onto his curves, and I've learned how to worst him, and the way to do it is to get him wobbling in his thinker. We were having a friendly contest, biffing along from green to green, leisurely puffing cigarettes, and now and then a witticism. Rockefeller had a wig. He looked like an English barrister. And he said, your Uncle John rarely laughs loudly, but puckers his face in the queerest old-fashioned, just a second. I got to get this. Okay. And he said that, I won't inflict all this on, but he said that Rockefeller was ahead of him at 7, and I casually remarked that it was a shame that the public would insist that he was the cause of the increase in the price of kerosene. So the back part of his head grows scarlet. He always carries his wig in his inside pocket. And then he said he made a swipe at the ball, missed it, made a hole that you could bury a meeting house in, and he said after that, I won hands down. So the deal, Jesus, oh yeah, it's here. So as he said, strategy as well as skill helps me out. Engel's the one who formulated our sustaining mythology. When people stop believing a certain mythology, they no longer go on believing in nothing, they go on and believe in everything. I think this belief is fading. I hope that you folks have a good career as cosmetologists. It would be nice if you could take it a step further, but this belief, the idea that orthodontics is a learned medical calling, is fading. You know, we're worried about, for example, airway. There's a study with something like 5,000 patients. All had gone through a sleep study. Half of them had 4 bicuspids out. Presumably, the only reason they would have had 4 bicuspids out is for orthodontics. The other 2,000 and some did not. And according to the sleep study, you know what's the difference between the two? Nada, nothing, absolutely nothing. So my idea is, if you want to write the great American novel, go to get a literature degree. If you want to help breathing, get a medical degree. If you want to help children, do what we can do, not what people think is just that the patients will buy, etc. Here is a picture of one of Engel's graduation classes. And maybe this tells you as much about Engel as anything. One of the students didn't show up on time, so that this lateness would be immortalized forever. There was an empty chair put there. This, by the way, this is Percy Raymond Begg. Percy Raymond Begg, his claim to fame is that a president of the United States was his godfather. I believe this is Brody. I forget who all the people are. But that empty chair there was because one of the students didn't show up in time for the picture. And so the thing that you folks have to decide is, what kind of leader are you going to sit in that chair? Because you folks are the ones, you know, if you buy the stuff, if you attend the lectures, everything like that, you're the ones who will decide who's going to sit in that chair to lead orthodontics. And you have to decide whether it's going to be a medical scientist or a cosmetologist. It's your decision. And it's a decision that you will bring to life in the next 30, 35, 40 years. That's the guy that we're here because of. And the interesting thing was, when I was at St. Louis, before they moved, they had all the graduation pictures, and you could go out in the hall and you could see graduation picture with Engel with the students. Strange enough, I think also Case, now Case Western Reserve wasn't named after him, but I think Case taught at Western Reserve. So it's kind of nice I occupied the chairs that Angle and Case occupied. Anyway, I will go through a slightly abbreviated version. This was actually history number 5, but seeing as how I thought this might go over a little bit, I showed it first. So, to finish off the day, this is, oh, get rid of this here. Ooh, this erases really nicely. This is 1870, roughly after the time of the American Civil War to 1900. And this was a period in which some people became famous who regulated teeth. It wasn't a specialty, but there were a certain number of people, well, like now, you've got, what is it? You've got people who decide that they go to key one aligner to another aligner and grow mandibles, you know, and a person gets famous for this. Well, this was a period of time in which people who regulated malocclusion, there were a few of them who became very famous, and they were called, and don't tell anybody that I wrote this. The fathers of orthodontics. Now, I know that's awful to say, but the fact is he had a number of women in his class. It's just that back then, that's the way they talked. And we had Kingsley, and we had, you see I'm a little bit out of sequence here, and so I'd like to tell you a little bit about these folks and what they did. Well, Norman William Kingsley he precepted under his uncle. At age 36, he founded, it was the founder and first dean of NYU. He was famous for his work in cleft palate. He wrote the first American orthodontic text called Treatise on Oral Deformities as a branch of mechanical surgery. They didn't really know where to put orthodontia and everything. But here, I'll show you some of his appliances. Let me see here. Oh, those are supposed to be incisal edges. And then, oh, what color will gold be today? I think red. So he would make gold caps together, and out on the side would come like that, and they had a piece of brass with and this would hook onto there, and this in turn would hook on to a chin cap. And the idea was that what he was interested in, and so in case you don't know what these are, he realized that when you retracted incisors, I suppose we'd call it rabbiting now. And so when when he retracted an incisor, it would get longer, and he didn't like that. So this was directional forces, intrusion, retraction, everything like that. And I suppose I should do that. That was a piece of brass that snapped in both sides, hooked to a head cap like the one you saw there, and he could intrude teeth. The thing that he was this was, it was hooked to the head cap with elastics, and the thing that he was really famous for, here I'll start in the back here. He was famous for his vulcanite bite jumper. He was the first person to jump the bite to try and grow more mandible. And it was made of vulcanite, and I'm passing one around there. But it was a very, very clever appliance. In fact, it was an appliance that actually might be popular today. Anyway, let me see if I do. That went over the upper dentition. This was an inclined plane to jump the mandible forward. He would have and then the cleverest thing of all was that coming out of this, so he had, and the interesting thing was, he also, if I can show this, this is the thing coming out of the mouth there, and let me see here. How do I want to do this? Oh well. This is the sort of head cap. Well, actually, it was like this. And it went around the head, it attached there, and in order to make sure that the mandible stayed forward, he had a fox bandage. So he had the mandible forward, and the patient couldn't escape from that, because they had a fox bandage to hold the mandible closed. At the same time, he had extraoral traction, like so, a really, really clever appliance. And he was the first one to say, the success of orthodontia as a science and an art now lies in the retainer. He popularized the use of retainers, although he said he was agnostic as to how long they should be used. Now we come to John N. Farrar, John Nutting Farrar. And he was 1839 to 1913, so 1913 was kind of a bad year for the fathers of orthodontics. Now, I need to show you his appliance was based on the jack screw, and I need to put the caps on some of these damn. I need to show you what a jack screw was like. I know this looks strange, but what it was, this is, I suppose I should have done this. There was the screw here, there was a ball attached to it, and you used a right angle thing like that to move that. Up here, however, was a head that had a hole in it, and it was free swinging. So the deal is, this would rotate, and then that could be tied to a tooth, like that. That was his appliance. But I'll show you how it all went together. Oh, by the way, this, in case I don't forget, some people used elastics, some people used springs, some people used jack screws. The people who used springs argued that it was good to have a light continuous force. The people who used jack screws said, no, you need to move the tooth and then let it rest. Move the tooth and let it rest. Move the tooth and let it rest. So if you learn nothing more from anything I've said, just remember, a theoretical basis that's tacked on after the appliance is invented means nothing. If the theoretical basis is there first, for example, like TADS, the theoretical basis was there. There was no reason to doubt that TADS would work. People knew that without a periodontal ligament, a screw wouldn't move. So if a screw wouldn't move and you want to grab a hold of something, put in a little screw. So here was his appliance. And this is always complicated to draw. Canine. Now, we're going to have, let me see here, we're going to have a clamp band. And he used clamp bands around 2 teeth. And then there would be a lingual tube like that, into which would go and this was threaded like so, and here were the hex nuts that adjusted it, so it could be adjusted that way. But then again, in here, were his jack screws tied to the teeth, of course, like so. Angle looked at that appliance and said it was a mechanical monstrosity. Can you imagine having that in your mouth? And this was threaded and hooked there, And so it would push. And so in that way, he could move the teeth, move the roots out. Calvin Case had a thing exactly like that, only his was on the lingual surface, and the old, there's got to be someplace here. The one I handed out that I said was a masterpiece of, yeah, you'll see here how the idea of getting up near the center of resistance, that's an example. And Case had a really interesting proof. People didn't believe that this sort of thing would work. So Case's thing was, if you had a block on the table and you had a circular thing, and if you pushed on it here, this would move bodily. And I think he said, have it attached there. He said, if that will move things bodily, then what difference does it make if you get rid of that? It'll still move it bodily. That was his proof that an arm up like that near the center of resistance, that would allow the teeth to be moved bodily. And so these were the first appliances that you could move, and he called this a compensating force. And I'll tell you a little bit about Engel's appliances. I'll tell you more about them next time. But and I think probably the one I can talk about now is the E arch, and E stood for expansion. And this could be really heavy, 035, 040, 045. It had a threaded end section, and onto that, wait a minute, I did that wrongly. No, I did it rightly. Something like that. And that was a bad drawing of the screw, but what you have here is you have a buccal tube, and I'll draw a buccal tube in section like this. And this screw here like so, and this threaded end section went into there, and this was friction. So the deal is you could put this in, turn it up, and there was friction enough there so that if you turned it in to advance the arch wire, it would hold. Sometimes he had a little added piece of gold up there. Can anybody guess what? I swear to God, I'll disappear. I'll just disappear in a cloud. If anybody knows, can figure out what that, this is called a ribbed E-arch, what the rib is for. What?
Was it to get torque?
Nope.
Prevent the lip or something?
Nope. The thing is, if he wanted, all he had was grass line to move teeth, linen that would shrink. So if he had a tooth here that he wanted to be there, what he would do is you take a Houck file and make a little nick. That was something that you could make a nick in, and so as a result, oh, I tell you, never break, never have a compression fracture. It hurts like hell. But the deal is, then he could, he had, it was something he could, he could make a cut in that. It wouldn't weaken the arch wire, and he was able then to move teeth the way he wanted. Also, up here, and if you look at, where is the magic one? The magic 2-level one. Okay, I want everybody to look. There was his attachment for his headgear. Pass it around. Because what would happen is there would be a like that. And it would go over that thing like a hitch on a trailer. Very, very clever. Angle was against extraction, although you can find examples of extraction in his book. They supposedly, well, he thought it was sort of a religious thing back then, that you couldn't climb to perfection if you took away some of the parts. That if the face were missing 4 teeth, then you could never achieve perfection because you had destroyed things. Also, supposedly, he took out 2 bicuspids in Anna Hopkins and couldn't close the space and had to have a prosthodontist make 2 bridges. And he found that extremely, extremely embarrassing. So, but still quite clever. Where would you, now, Angle liked to use springs and wires. If you needed a piece of, say, 020 stainless steel in 1900, where do you think you'd go to get it? What?
The steel mill?
Well, yeah. Get a block. I got this block of steel now. Could you make me some wire? No. What? Nope. The music store. Pianoforte wire. It was, his things were made of piano wire. And so he quite often used that. In fact, for example, he might have like that, and he might have, let me see here. Yeah, he might have a wire that goes in like this, and then another one here. Gesundheit. And then sometimes in a situation, this are, by the way, our bands right there. And then he might put an elastic on it to intrude, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Interestingly enough, I'll show you probably the first example of using pianoforte wire. Have you heard of a coffin spring? That's what I need, by the way. But anyway. That's what's called a coffin spring. It's sort of like a Porter wire, but the purpose of that was to split the palate. The strange thing was that palate splitting was an incredibly common thing, but after the war there were no key opinion leaders were advertising palate splitting, so it was completely forgotten until in the 1970s Andy Haas down in Ohio reintroduced it. He's the one who has the plastic one that gets all the crap under it and stinks and everything like that. But I can remember when I actually was in the 60s, I remember taking an occlusal film. I couldn't believe that they were splitting the palate. That's how completely the knowledge of palate splitting was lost. And when it was reintroduced, you go back and all the things that people talk about now were talked about 100 years ago. Increasing the airway, blah, 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 blah. You know, the deal is, our ideas, we're sort of in a silo. And, you know, like extraction. Well, it's like a feather going down a silo or elevator shaft. You know, it drifts over and it hits a wall and can't go any farther, so it may drift over to the other one. So you have extraction, and then the only thing you can do to change extraction is to go to non-extraction. And then, you know, it's just, you know, the feather goes down the elevator shaft. We change without all that much of a reason for changing. And this was, I forgot this. This was 1860. So we've been splitting palates for quite a while. Where the hell? Oh yeah, there it is. Now we need probably Calvin Suveril case. Case was the smartest of the bunch. He was, I think he precepted here in Michigan with his uncle. I think he precepted in Jackson, Michigan. He graduated from the University of Michigan Medical School in 1871. And his argument with Angle was that there would have to be some cases that you'd have to extract. Now, when we're talking about, Angle said no extraction, Case said yes, extraction. But he's not talking about 20%. He's not talking about 10%. He's saying that there will come up patients 1 a year, 2 a year, 10 a year that you have to extract on. So when people tell me, and they say, oh, I don't extract anymore, I always think to myself, how the hell can that be? How can that be? Blow them forward, glue them together, give them a prophy, and then tell them it's all up to them? You know, the deal is if you check your coat, the little slip will say not responsible for lost items. But if you take them to court, the court says, by God, they are responsible. And so when you get to retirement and have 20 or 30,000 patients floating around with your appliance in their mouth, even though you said it's all up to you, if, as happened in England a little while ago, one of them comes loose and somebody inhales it, you can't say, well, I told them it was up to them. So flaring them out, gluing them together, and hoping for the best, I don't know. Anyway, Calvin Suveril Case, he started cephalometrics. He would make plaster casts of the face. Unfortunately, I didn't. What you would do is you'd put down paper mache on the face, let it dry, and then you'd put a wash of plaster in it, and that would give you a model of the face, and he could then pour it up, and sometimes they would have a cut out so you could put in the models so you could see how the teeth related to the profile. When I was in dental school, unfortunately I didn't know it. I thought it'd be kind of cool to have block of my face. And so I greased up my face and put a thing on. Somebody poured the plaster down. There's one tiny little thing I forgot. Plaster setting is exothermic. And by God, is it exothermic. And when I got to school, they say, "Why, have you been to Florida?" Anyway. And he also had a way of moving teeth bodily. But here, his fight, when I went to see the angle stuff at the Smithsonian, there was in angle stuff, there was a formal invitation to, I think it was the Harvard Club in New York, to join Calvin Case for an evening of cigars and port. And I think Angle did not accept the invitation. But anyway, this is what Case said about a careful study of the question of extraction, which is so largely dependent upon causes and which lies at the very foundation of the advanced dentofacial orthopedia, must convince every receptive, truth-seeking mind of the delusiveness of a teaching which asserts the universal applicability of the normal occlusion theory, which is every tooth or its artificial substitute is necessary for the perfect correction of dental or dentofacial malocclusion. Funny thing, when I taught at Reserve, he taught there, and I had a whole bunch of Calvin Case's papers that he had typed out. That, in those days you typed out a paper and you read it at a meeting. And what the hell did I know? So I left him. But Case was the man. Case and Angle, extraction, non-extraction. And essentially it was kind of a religious moral argument. And it's a funny thing. Back then, Angle thought that the folks that were just trying to make a fast buck, they were the ones who would extract. Nowadays, we say, the ones that want to make a fast buck don't extract. Back then, the honest people treated without extraction. Now God-fearing orthodontists who treat with extraction are the good folks. It's a moral, religious argument, back and forth. Remember the feather in the elevator shaft. I think that's good enough for the day. Yeah, let me see if there's anything else I need to show you here. Pass this around quickly. God bless it. This shows you before Angle and Company, how jack screws and everything like that. To show you how things have changed, I used to teach techniques to undergrads, and this was 1 week's sophomore orthodontic wire bending exercise. And that was a wonderful way of separating those who ought to be orthodontists from those who probably ought not to be orthodontists. And the interesting thing about that is, if it's done properly, you can take it off like this, and it'll lie there, there, and there perfectly. And then it goes back on. And that, I think I saved, if I remember how this goes on. Anyway, it's like this. I used to bend this as a demonstration for the troops. Needless to say, I don't do that anymore. But the deal is, if you can handle round wire in 3 planes of space, it's a lot harder than rectangular wire, because the rectangular wire sort of tells you how you have to bend it. But round wire, I'll take this, and let me see if there's anything else I didn't show you. Here's another E-arch. And let's see here. I think that's about it. And so the next time, this was 3 and 4. Yeah, we'll be okay. When's the next time we're supposed to do this? Let me see. Is it going to be what? The March 20? No, March 22nd.
I don't see that.
Oh well, today's okay. Tomorrow.
Oh, superposition March 21st.
Yeah. Are you first year, or second year?
First year.
Oh, then I'm not teaching you. Are you folks getting superimposition?
That's what it says.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So I will see you in March. Have fun at the Moyer Symposium. The best thing is Friday, the pre-symposium. That's where the good stuff occurs.